Queer Relation Tips, an iAmClinic podcast devoted to helping you, the LGBTQ plus community, create the love lives and relationships you crave.
It's a matter of I chose unhealthy patterns to cope up until the point where I realized I can't do this anymore. And I made a drastic change, and that change drove me into deeper discomfort. But now I'm in a space of excitement and joy that I could have never imagined before.
Hello, my name is Isaac Archuleta, and I'm today's host, and I just wanted to say Happy Pride. The Pride theme we have for this year is iAmResilient, to remind us that we have power in a political world that would rather deny our rights, silence our voices, and erase us from the scene. In today's episode, I sit down with an inspirational force, and I mean that literally, because they are a force of empowerment, wisdom, and self-healing. We often talk about trauma, and that is a good thing. But what we often forget in the conversation around trauma, whether it be political, relational, religious, is that we are resilient. Trauma strips us from knowing our own resilience, and we can get stuck in feeling defined by or controlled by our trauma. Hence, iAmResilient. So in today's episode, we hear one person's story of resilience, and it comes with a powerful force. I hope you enjoy. Let's take a listen.
Well, I like to spend the month before Pride, like getting myself prepared for Pride. And I mean, the majority of that is the mental, emotional understanding of who I am and who I'm becoming and like the changes that I've made within the year. So I spend a lot of time reflecting on that. And then from that reflection, I find out like, how can I best embody who I am or who I know myself to be? So then I kind of create like intentional costumes and outfits and things. And then I go out and I communicate with people, and I show this element of myself that I think is the most authentic, truest version of me. It changes every single year, which is natural. But for me, Pride is about just being completely open and honest with who I am. And in some ways, it's a performance. It's a performance for myself, and it's a way for others to feel like they can begin to express something that they haven't been able to express.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Sounds like you're very intentional.
I try to be, especially around like big celebrations and holidays. Mm-hmm. I find them to be very energetically charged, and I want to utilize that energy to the best of my ability. So that's why I approach them very intentionally.
As you may know, our theme for this Pride is iAmResilient. And we came up with that theme because several factors. I think that in our society right now, trauma is playing a very big role. People are talking about their trauma, they're understanding it. And I think that sometimes we forget that we can be traumatized and experience resilience. Sometimes trauma becomes such a powerful force that it can consume us. And I don't think if we have this connection to our body, like we talked about before, that it can almost feel like trauma is our new prison. And for some people, it can almost feel like trauma is their new identity.
Yeah, I just have to say the theme is very important, specifically for this time. So I'm happy to be able to kind of speak to that through my own life. There's two things that come up. As I was growing up, I had a speech disorder, and the speech disorder caused me to have some learning difficulties that developed. And through that, I started to feel like the space of education isn't something that's for me. It was really difficult. I had to get extra tutoring. I had to like really work 2 times as hard as other people to overcome some of the adversity that I was experiencing. So that was one really big thing. And I mean, eventually I graduated from high school. I ended up going to a really great institution for undergrad, and then for both of my grad programs, because now I'm in a doctoral program. And so for me, the way I overcame that was the realization of who I want to be and what I need to do in order to become that person. And so I wanted to be in the face of other people who are facing difficulty. And I want to inspire them, and I want to tell them my story, and I want to pull out their story and encourage them. And in order for me to do that, I can't just realize like, okay, here's my difficulty. I'm going to skirt away from it. I'll dance around it. I had to like actually overcome it and work through it. So I put in the extra hours of tireless work and failure in order to achieve that. And so that's one major adversity that I had. And I think another that's tied to that is the lack of representation. As I was climbing up sounds a little hierarchical, but as I was going through my scholarly journey, I saw less and less people of color. As I was going deeper into my spiritual practices and psychological work, I saw less queer folks, and specifically queer folks of color. So I had very little representation, very little examples and mentors into these spaces that I was going into. So I often felt alone. And I'm like, why am I here? Am I doing something wrong? Because there's no one else around me that's doing what I'm doing. And that isolation, that loneliness is extremely debilitating. It left me just constantly questioning myself and doubting everything that I do. And I had to find little moments of representation in movies and TV shows and in these few interactions with people that I met. And that's what really inspired me to keep going. And it kind of helped me see that I can trailblaze a new path so that the people that are following after me feel like they can do something a little bit easier.
I wonder if that loneliness and isolation you mentioned, was that in some way shaming?
It was. And I felt the shame because, so one of the things that I believe is when we're in isolation and when we're in the state of being by ourselves, there's all these thoughts that swirl around. Some of the thoughts belong to us. A lot of the thoughts do not. It's other people's superimposed expectations or what have you that they put on you. And when you're in isolation, those thoughts become louder and louder and louder. And it's just, when these sort of thoughts come up, we have to recognize like, okay, this thought is mine. This doesn't belong to me. This came from this particular space. And I found that there was so much shame that was kind of coming up in me. Shame for me being the mixture of being a Black person and a gay person. Shame for me being non-binary. Shame for me looking into the more esoteric realms of psychology, focusing on spirituality and spirits, which is not talked about because indigenous cultures have been wiped out across the world. So there's so much shame because I let the voices of society speak to me a little bit too loudly. But once I differentiated those voices, I was able to silence them, recognize where they come from and why they're there, and then step over them with my own voice.
Totally. Absolutely. How do you differentiate those voices? Like, what is your practice? What do you do? I find this very, very helpful for a lot of clients, but I'm curious as to how you do it.
Oh, yeah. So step one is to be silent. Maybe it's 2 steps or 3 steps. So step one is to be silent with yourself. That means not spending time listening to music or watching TV shows or even talking to people, literally just being with yourself. So once you can get into that space, you can start to recognize all the different voices that are coming up. And then I guess the second step would be for you to become more sensitive to the body. And when you start to say certain things to yourself, say it aloud, how does your body react to that? And start to track, like, okay, when I'm saying these certain things, I feel this sting in the right side of my body. Or when I'm saying these sort of things, like my ears start to get like warm or whatever. And so just start to notice it, not judge it and create associations yet, but just start to notice these different things. And then the final part is really just going into those phrases, those things that are coming up, those words or sentences, and then just asking yourself, like, what is the source of this? Is the source of this thing, is it love or is it fear? or hatred, because I find those two emotions are on the two ends of the binaries. Sure. Something is either related to love or fear and hatred. And then when I ask that question, I get an interesting answer. And I just use all of that data to kind of come to a conclusion as to, is this something that I've created, or is this something that someone else has been put onto me? Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of like a non-scientific process as to figuring out whether or not the thoughts are yours or someone else's.
I love that. You always blow my mind every time. I love it. I just love the way that you're reminding all of us that the body has everything it needs to heal. And I think as we differentiate these voices and allowing us to not only hear them and speak them aloud, but to feel their effect at different or various places in our body, gives the body the ability to heal itself and repair itself and find its own sense of truth.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I'll just add to that very quickly that a lot of the times we allow our minds to dictate the way we operate in the world, because we live in a society that's very mind oriented, or like using that mental faculty. And the second you allow the body to start to orient yourself, you start to see something different. You start to operate differently, you start to see things and feel things differently. Mm-hmm. And when there's all these thoughts that are circling around in the mind, it doesn't make sense for me to use the mind to make sense of what's going on. You have to use something that's a little bit outside of that space in order to reflect or to look back. And so that's why I always return to the body, because the body gives me information that I can then help to sort out the mess, the chaos that might be going on in my mind.
Mm-hmm. I love that. It's almost like spring cleaning. Tidying up that old closet, like just pulling out all of the trash, throwing away what needs to go away, and then putting back, but in an organized way, what we keep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just like Marie Kondo in some ways.
Exactly.
Recognizing like what brings you joy, what belongs, and then getting rid of whatever needs to go to the dumpster.
Exactly. If Marie Kondo helps us clean our homes, Sifu Love helps us clean our bodies.
That's interesting. Okay, I'll take that.
I wish I had that title, but I don't deserve it. I'll just leave that there for you. So in my rational way, one of the things that I find really helpful is when someone is hearing a narrative, they don't love me, or they betrayed me. It can almost feel like, what did I do to deserve that? And so a way of like challenging those thoughts, and I recommend this all the time, is to come up with an alternative narrative. Instead of saying, well, they left in a huff and maybe I did something wrong, the alternative narrative could say, in their maturity, they could have hit the pause button. They could have expressed their frustrations, and we could have had a repairing conversation, but they didn't take that route. And understanding the alternative scenario or narrative really helps us, at least cognitively, walk away from shame. And I love what you're saying here, because if we could find, I'm wondering, let me test this out on you. If we could find that alternative narrative and how that hits the body, that might come from a place of love and compassion, and we might feel warmth somewhere else, or something like that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because when we start to create these alternate narratives, there's something in these narratives that there's this underpinning of desire. And, these alternate narratives that you're creating are based off of a situation in which you wish you would have seen, a life you wish you would have experienced, a moment you wish would have come into fruition. And so there's this little bud of desire within that. And for me, desire is fiery. So it is this warmth that overcomes the body. It's this like luscious fluidity that occurs. And so when you do start to speak about what it is that you desired in the past and what you desire in the future, it does have a specific effect on the body, because it's sourcing from a different place. It's not sourcing from fear. It's sourcing from, I would say, desire. So because of that, it does feel a little bit different in the body.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. As a kiddo, feeling some of these blockades, as you went through academics and your own spiritual, psychological journey, what did it feel like to approach those blockades? To sit in that loneliness, to feel the isolation, to experience the shame. How did it feel to kind of walk closer to those experiences, but know that you still had to move forward?
The short answer is uncomfortable. It was really, really uncomfortable. And, I would say before I got, advanced into my meditation process, I found myself going toward coping mechanisms in order to deal with the difficulty. So, a lot of my coping mechanisms center around needing validation from other people. And so I would do things in order to get people's validation, even though those things made me feel uncomfortable or bad about myself or something that I would regret. I did it because I was operating in spaces where I felt alone. And if I got someone else's validation, then I'm like, okay, well, this person still loves me, or this person tells me that I'm beautiful, or this person tells me that I'm smart. So I'm going to gravitate toward them, do whatever it is that they need in order for them to keep feeding me these compliments. And hopefully this will help me continue down this particular path that I was going on. And so I found myself people pleasing a lot. I found myself in addictive behavioral patterns just to continue to please the people that were around me. And, it worked to an extent, but it destroyed me. When I made the commitment to myself to listen to my body and to follow what my soul was trying to encourage me to do, I had to stop doing those things. I had to stop doing things for other people. I had to do things for myself. And that drove me into a deeper level of loneliness, which was even more uncomfortable. But from there, I was able to find something that felt true, something that felt real. I was able to find the 2 people on a university campus of 6,000 that actually understood who I was and could promote me in a way that made me feel good about myself. Mm-hmm. And so I fell into the depths of isolation and loneliness. And from there, I found a very small group of people. The group has expanded now, but I found a small group of people who have helped shepherd me to where I am now. So I think I kind of went around your question a little bit, and let me know if there's something to clarify. But basically, it's a matter of I chose unhealthy patterns to cope up until the point where I realized I can't do this anymore, and I made a drastic change, and that change drove me into deeper discomfort. But now I'm in a space of excitement and joy that I could have never imagined before.
It sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like that turning point, if you will, that pivot was the use of resilience, the experience of it, the determination to find it. Why the pivot? I mean, you could have continued to spiral downward and find yourself, ruined by addiction, but why pivot?
There's kind of 2 parts to this. So the pivot happened for me in college, probably my second year in college. I started to do more martial arts competitions. And I was at advanced level, but I was trying to get to the higher level of advanced. And so I was training really, really hard. And there was a couple of weeks in my training leading up to this major tournament that happens. A bunch of schools around the United States gather for this one major Chinese martial arts tournament. And as I was training for the tournament, I couldn't perform the moves that I needed to. And they're not difficult moves. They're simple moves, but I couldn't flow in between the movements very well. I was stuck. My body wasn't responding the energy that was being cultivated, because martial arts is about the way we cultivate and utilize our own energy. So I couldn't cultivate enough energy. I just felt weak and I felt powerless. And I sat with myself in meditation and I'm like, why can I not do this? The series is simple, but I can't do it. And the answer that came to me is because I'm stuck in this people pleasing attitude. I'm stuck with my sex addiction to the point where it's causing me to be so far removed from myself that I physically cannot perform this very simple move that I've been able to do for like 10 years at that particular point. And that was devastating for me to realize I can't do this. And I was like, well, something needs to change. And so that's when I made that commitment to myself. I got deeper into not deeper into the martial arts practices, but I got deeper into my other spiritual practices, and I supplemented that into the martial arts practices. I felt my own life force like grow rapidly, like a bonfire almost. And then I was able to perform beautifully. I was able to, winning isn't that important, but I did win that particular tournament in my section, and nobody thought that I could. And the reason I was able to was because I realized like I was weak in my own life force. And I took the initiative to bring back up my life force. And from then on, the way that I've operated in the world is extremely different. So it's all because of martial arts that I had this sort of like this come to Jesus moment, as people usually call it. Like I needed to change and I needed to do something. And also in that period, I just noticed how I was treating the people around me. I was being very manipulative and distant and crass and rude. So I was like, this needs to change. And it did. It did. It was again, an uncomfortable moment, very uncomfortable, but necessary.
As I mentioned before, the theme for this Pride series is I Am Resilient because we want to remind all of you that trauma is strong and effective, but so are we. During this Pride season, I hope, and I mean sincerely hope, that you take time to recognize your power, your natural talents, your genuine nature, and your ability to create the safety you need. I hope you take care of yourself from the inside out as you celebrate who you are. Happy Pride. Now, let's get back to the show.
You know, when I think of resilience, it's there's many different versions of the definition out there. The resistance, the resistance to being affected, the ability to adapt. I think a lot of us think of like, it may be a kitschy metaphor, but I don't think it is, but the phoenix, you know, rising from its own ashes. And in some way, it almost seems like that's where you found yourself. Kind of, how do I turn this circumstance around and how do I create good out of what I have?
Yeah. And you know, it's interesting that you mentioned the phoenix, because I resonate with that a lot. My very first martial arts school, I was part of a small group of like elite performers, and we were called the Phoenixes. And so that image is always stuck in my mind of like, you know, when things are really hard, there is a period of rebirth that comes after you allow that full death to happen. And that's one of the issues that I have with people sometimes, is that people don't allow that full death to happen. They kind of go through the more shallow level of that particular process, but you really need to feel into the depths of whatever it is that you're experiencing in order to be able to rise into that particular phoenix. And I think once we have the skill set of resilience, it's what allows us to die in that particular sense, and then gives us the capacity for that kind of rebirth.
Right.
So I think the phoenix it is overused, but I think it's really important. It's an important metaphor for resilience.
Totally. I like how you're speaking of it in terms of like rebirth. One of my all-time favorite quotes, it's very, very short, but it's death before life. And it's almost, I use that quote as almost like an anchor. When I feel like I'm losing something, I have lost something, someone gives me criticism and positive feedback, when I recognize a pattern that I need to change, that phrase really kind of tethers me down into kind of a deeper part of my core, where I've made peace with the dying that needs to happen, because I know that death always comes before life. This rejuvenation, the life force, whatever we might call it. And I really do resonate with you here. I think I heard of this from my mentor once. He was talking to me about death before life, and I was like, oh yeah, like the death part and then the life. And I didn't really spend enough time being curious around the death part. You alluded to it, like at first this resilience was like more discomfort, because I don't think we know how to, in our culture, and I'm being pejorative here, but I don't think we know how to die. I think we know how to medicate. I think we know how to avoid, distract. When you slipped into that level of more discomfort, if we were going to help coach people from the darkness to the deeper depths of the darkness so that they could pop out, what might they experience in that dark valley?
The biggest thing for me is irrationality and moodiness. I find that, when I'm going through something and it's hard, I'm there in that particular space. And then when I allow myself to feel into that difficulty, my actions don't quite make sense. I get very irrational. I get super, super moody. And usually what I would have done in the past is I would have, just as you said, like medicated myself and be like, okay, I'm moody. I need to enlighten myself. And this is the issue I have with this enlightenment idea. It's like, it's all about like being in the light and the positive and moving upward in that particular sense. So like when I'm in this like really irrational, moody state, usually I'd say, well, okay, let me go meditate and make myself feel better. And now I'm like, I might meditate, but it's not for the purpose of feeling better. It's for the purpose of fully feeling this moodiness. Mm-hmm. And so this actually happened a couple of weeks ago. I was kind of going down into like the darkness of my own psyche. And I started to feel moody, and I'm like, okay, let me go into meditation. And I noticed like 5 or 6 different emotions like kind of coming up. And the more I was in meditation, the more emotions started to come up. And I'm like, oh God, this is overwhelming. This is a lot. However, I've trained in a very specific way. I train my body and my psyche and my spirit in a way that I can handle this overwhelm of emotion. Mm-hmm. So I allowed it to come through me. And then after I finished the meditation, I was in a really, really bad mood. I had to cancel everything, and I had to just be alone to kind of like sit with everything. And so again, like you move into this state of being irrational and moody, it gets really uncomfortable and it gets really heavy, and then something clicks, and then like for me, it's usually like I go to sleep and the next day I wake up and I feel this tremendous lightness because I allowed myself to sit with this heaviness and it digested through my psyche in whatever way it needed to. And now I'm feeling this sort of lightness that's coming over me, which is the beginning of the rebirth. It's the ray of light that's shining that eventually opens up to a bigger ray of light, and you realize it's the sun, it's the sunrise, and it's noon and sunset. So, yeah.
When we watch, I first learned about this by doing my own trauma therapy, where I was working with a somatic experiencing therapist, and she had a massage table in her office where she did these certain techniques to help the body move trauma through. And it was fascinating. She would always describe kind of this wave where we would dip down and then pop up. And we talked about this wave and what the body was doing. It was going to go into fight, flight, or freeze. It was going to push all of this pain and trauma through. The part of the brain where a physical pain would register would start to fire because emotional pain makes that same region of the brain activate. Mm-hmm. And then eventually my body would push enough and I would kind of dive deep enough, and then parasympathetic, cool, calm, and collected would take over, and then I'd feel this peace and this resolve. And I was like, okay, I guess we'll try. So I lay down on the massage table and bawled my eyes out, groaning, like deep, painful groaning. And then I found like my breath started to slow and the sorrow dissipated and this wave of joy and peace came over. Mm-hmm. And it was so fascinating to watch my body heal itself. Mm-hmm. And I want to talk about this, and I'm so grateful to have you share your wisdom with us, because it feels to me like a lot of affirmation and a lot of safety and a lot of comfort to let those parts of us die, the unwanted patterns, the people pleasing, whatever it may be, the narratives, the shame. Because I do think that if we let it, the suffering is very, very temporary. But if we avoid and medicate, the suffering is somewhat maybe less painful, but continuous. Still painful, just a little bit less, and it never goes away.
Yeah. One thing I'll add to that, because I think it's always important, like whenever talking about death and suffering, that this conversation is centered around folks who have a certain stability already within their mental health. So this kind of death that we're talking about is for folks who have that foundation already within their own mental health. Letting old patterns die is something I found to be very, very important for myself. I used to believe that if I let these old beliefs die, then I don't know who I'm going to be, because I've identified with these beliefs and this is how I'm known in the world. And if I no longer believe that I am worthless, then, like I don't have that edge to me anymore. I'm no longer interesting. Like, who am I? Like, why do people come to me anymore? And so I had to like get rid of that way of thinking of like, okay, if I'm letting this part of myself die, I'm actually becoming something new. I don't have to identify with that old version of myself. Although it's comfortable to do that, I don't have to identify with that. And there's so much fear that comes up of like, okay, you're shedding this aspect of your identity that you've had for 15, 20 plus years. Are you sure you're ready for that? You don't know who you're going to be. You don't know how people are going to react to this new version of yourself. And so I had this conversation with myself over and over and over. And I had to realize that you have to let something go in order to let something in. Right. And so I had the strong desire to let a new way of being in, a new way of speaking, a new way of walking, a new way of eating and talking. There's this new version of me that I was imagining and seeing that was like visiting me in my dreams. And in order for me to become that person, to kind of court that person, I had to let go of all of this baggage that was holding me back from being able to become that person. And again, it's a scary process and it's not easy, but if we allow ourselves to be resilient and continue on that path of becoming the person that we want to be, the person that we know ourselves to be, then it's a journey, and it's a journey that's worth it. And I think it's so important that people realize that, because there is so much fear of letting go and dying of your younger past self.
When our trauma, when our pain, when our patterns, they're designed to medicate something, the fear of letting go of the medicine is so scary, because then we say, well, who am I if I'm just chronically in pain? Because I fully agree with you. I don't know if a lot of people know that we can heal from the pain. It's not up to consciousness in that moment, because we're like, oh, hell no, just survive. Pop another pill, in a sense, By embracing this process of letting the phoenix crumble. I often tell my clients it's a kind of another mantra that helps, but watch the crumbling. Just watch it crumble, and that's not a very comfortable place to sit. How have you benefited from that? How has resilience served you? Why push through all of that pain and toil so much?
I'm having this experience right now as a human being, and I don't know if I'm going to return as a human being again. I might be reincarnated as a cow. I might not even be reincarnated. I don't know. But I have this body right now. I'm a human right now in this moment. So why am I not living the life that I'm capable of living? Why am I not doing the things that I want to do? Why am I not talking to the people like you that I want to talk to and talk about these things that I want to talk about? And when I started to ask myself those questions, I'm just like, well, I'm just wasting my life. In a sense, I'm losing my destiny. And I define destiny as the pathway of our own desires. So I don't want to lose my destiny. I don't want to waste my limited time here on the earth. Now that doesn't mean I need to go do a whole laundry list of things. It actually means that I need to spend 6 hours a day just sitting outside staring at a tree, because that's how I feel the most joy and comfort and happiness. So I was like, I have this life that I know that I'm meant to live. So I want to live it. And, for me, the desire to live life fully is what encourages me to be more resilient. So when a challenge comes, I'm like, okay, this is a challenge. And this challenge, I'm going to grow from this challenge in some way. I don't have to know what the way is, but I'm going to grow from this challenge eventually to become this person that I see myself to be. And that particular sort of way of being started to happen when I started to have dreams of my future self. And I would talk with them, and they would share certain things with me, and I would be enamored by them. I'm literally in awe, and I'm like, wow, they're amazing. What can I do to become a little bit more like them? And now I ask myself this question almost every morning of like, what can I do to become more familiar to my own soul? And I take specific actions according to that. And I realize that everything that's happening in the outer world is helping me to become more aligned with my soul, with my own life force. And so that's what keeps me being resilient, is this belief that I have that I'm always in this pursuit of becoming more of myself. The more that I get in touch with my desires, I realize that my desires are all pointing me toward this direction. They're different kinds of desires that are all pointing me in toward the same path. And it's really exciting for me to begin to walk it. So I'd say I'm still in the midst of the creation of it. And right now, I'm really focused on this idea of ritual and what it means to hold ritual. Why do people have rituals? And my research right now is all about martial arts as a ritual practice, which is a brand new understanding of martial arts itself that I'm excited to usher out into the world, and then gather other martial artists to do these like public rituals that are also activists, modes of activism in a way. So that's what my soul is turning toward. And I don't know the specific steps it's going to get there, but I tune in with my desire daily, and I know that it's guiding me toward that.
Sounds like what you're crafting or building as I don't want to use the word authenticity. It feels like a genuineness. Like when I think of genuine, to articulate a little bit more, it means like from the essence. It is pure. It is original. It is.
I've always loved that word, genuine. And it's funny, quick story. When I was younger and I had my speech impediment, I would get genuine and genuine, the singer, mixed up. So I would like, in a sentence, I get them mixed up very often. And I have this very strong memory of that. And so the word genuine is very precious to me because of that. So thank you. I didn't think about using that word often, but I think it's going to be something that I focus on, because for me, genuineness is about the return to the essence and the return of what feels like what is, versus I think authenticity is like a little bit pitched toward the external world a little bit, whereas genuineness is more internal. At least that's what's coming up initially as we have this conversation. So thank you for that. I want to explore that further. For a large part of my life, I felt like I needed to be so seeped in my own trauma and difficulty and challenges, and that was how I identified myself. And anything that felt joyous or exciting, I would turn away from it, because I'm like, well, this is taking me away from it's taking me away from challenges. And I understand challenges to bring about depth and mastery and all of these great things. But there is this other element to life about experiencing and being in joy and pleasure. And a lot of my life, I was afraid of that, because I mean, I was told as a Black person, as a queer person, that the things that I find most joyous or pleasurable are wrong, or I'm not supposed to find these things enjoyable. So I would just tell myself to follow the joy and allow myself to dress up as Sailor Venus and go to Comic-Con or go to this anime convention and not be afraid of that. Not try to fit in, and by fitting in, being stuck into this paradigm that's going to constantly continue to traumatize and harm and pull me away from myself, but actually turn more deeply inward into what the voices are trying to communicate to me that I want to do. Turn toward joy, recognize the challenges, but realize that joy is maybe a goal versus, seeing it as another challenge to try to overcome, if that makes sense.
I do think about all of the Gen Zers who might be listening, and I'm so excited to be able to inspire them to do what I would have loved to have done, to embrace my joy, to have come out earlier, to have fallen in love with myself at an earlier age. I'm so thankful for the life and the challenges that I've had, because dying in those ways has produced a life I'm so thankful for. But I'm excited for them to experience that at an earlier age, and maybe their deaths won't be so painful. Yeah,
that's very true. I have the same hope, and at the same time, I look back at like myself and folks that are older than me who have gone through deaths and resurrections, and I can see the magnitude of gratitude and excitement for life that we've experienced because of these deeply uncomfortable deaths is almost unmatched. And so that's one thing I have to remind myself is like, my deaths have been horrible. And at the same time, I'm deeply grateful for them, because I have this new way of tasting the air, or a new way of feeling my skin or someone else's skin because of it. And I don't know where I would have been without it, but looking past the death, like looking back at it, I am just very happy as to who I've become now. And now that I'm older and I have this capacity to like make something happen immediately, it feels restorative to a whole nother degree, because I can quickly create this new reality that I want for myself. Whereas if I were younger, I wouldn't be able to create that reality so quickly. It would take a little bit more effort there. So I guess I'm grateful for my age for that regard. But if things happen younger, I don't know what my life would have been like, but I'm sure it would have also been exciting and amazing as it is now.
I spent many years, more years than I am comfortable admitting to, medicating trauma. Developmental trauma, the trauma of conversion therapy, and even sexual assault trauma. I buried trauma's sting with alcohol, hookups, and busyness. I know what it feels like to numb out trauma just to feel normal and in control. In fact, I was completely unaware before I became a therapist that I suffered from trauma and that something could be done. It wasn't until halfway through graduate school that I actually realized the daily panic wasn't normal and that it was called anxiety. I didn't even learn that my anxiety was the symptom of the trauma locked in my body until I found myself on a therapist's couch several years later. As many of you know, I consider it my life's work to bring mental health resources to the queer community because I believe in us, and I want nothing more for all of us than to find wholeness. That's why I'm often frustrated in the ways in which the cultural narrative around trauma has surfaced. I wished we talked about both trauma and resilience as a set. Trauma is a powerful force indeed, and as I said, so are we. It might not be trauma that stands in your way, but whatever it is, I hope that this Pride you take time to not only celebrate your genuine self, but also your power to heal and your ability to stand firm. What does it mean to be queer? I like to start with a medical basis. We are literally born queer. For more information on that, see the episode with Dr. Joni Jack. And from the inside out, we possess the ability to introduce a beautiful diversity to the world. Our love, our gender, our expressions, and our truth is literally a force that allows every other person on the planet to embrace and express their truth as well. By standing firm in our genuine natures, we give the world the ability to finally dismantle hate and embrace the full spectrum of who we are as a race. I don't want to sound naive or hyperbolic, but I do want to highlight that now is the time to lean into our resilience, whether it's in academia, in your office, in your place of worship, or in the face of trauma, or in this horrible political climate. We can claim our territory. The part that does take time, effort, and a lot of support is learning how to let the old parts, the old patterns, the old dysfunctional roles die. One of my professors used to say that when we take something out of our lives, we need to fill that hole with something new. Oftentimes, we might be afraid of our resilience because we might not have any idea of who we will be or what we will do once we initiate change. But as Sifu said today, you have to let something go to let something in. And that process shouldn't be without reflection, it shouldn't be done overnight, and it shouldn't be done without caution and wisdom. I still have work to do. In the quiet moments when the busyness has come to an end and people retreat to their own corners, I find myself still addressing old memories, trying to tie up old frayed ends and perfecting new habits. And that is how life flows. I am sure that we will always be striving towards more health. And as I continue on my own journey, I am proud of the changes I've made and the benefits they have brought my way. Resilience and the courage to enact it will change your life too, I promise. During Pride, I hope that you take time to find your resilience and where it is most necessary today. Until next time. Mwah.
Queer Relation Tips is a podcast sponsored by iAmClinic, a counseling practice devoted to the LGBTQ+ community with in-person and virtual counseling options available. iAmClinic. Create the love lives and relationships you crave. Find us online on Instagram at LGBTQ_therapy and Facebook at iAmClinic. That's iAmClinic.